If you've been feeling it, you're not imagining it. People are becoming more narcissistic, more aggressive, more toxic. And this isn't just your personal experience. This is a documented psychological fact. Carl Jung predicted this exact phenomenon nearly a century ago. He called it a psychic epidemic, a contagion of the unconscious mind that spreads when individuals lose their souls to what he termed the mass mind. What you're witnessing isn't random cruelty. It's the inevitable result of humanity abandoning individuation for collective possession. And if you don't understand how this virus spreads, you will be consumed by it. Jung discovered something that terrified him during his darkest period. Between 1913 and 1919, while the world descended into the madness of the First World War, Jung experienced what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. He saw visions of blood flooding Europe months before war broke out. He witnessed entire populations possessed by archetypal energies they couldn't understand or control. And he realized that what was happening wasn't political or economic. It was psychological. Societies were losing their individual souls to a collective shadow that demanded expression through violence, hatred, and destruction. Jung called this phenomenon mass psychosis, the complete dissolution of individual consciousness into the unconscious mind of the group. And he warned that it would happen again unless humanity learned to face what it was repressing. What Jung understood is that every human being carries a shadow. This is the part of yourself you cannot accept. Your capacity for cruelty, for selfishness, for deception. In healthy individuals, the shadow is acknowledged and integrated. You accept that you are capable of darkness without acting it out unconsciously. But in modern society, we are taught to repress the shadow completely. Social media demands that you present only your best self. Corporate culture requires you to wear a mask of perpetual positivity. Political tribalism forces you to identify completely with your chosen ideology and project all evil onto the opposition. This creates what Jung called the inflation of the persona, where people identify 100% with their masks and lose all contact with their authentic selves. When this happens on a mass scale, entire societies become collections of empty shells, what some have started calling NPCs, people who have no inner life, no individual perspective, only programmed responses to external stimuli. The shadow doesn't disappear when you repress it. It goes underground. It accumulates in the unconscious, both personal and collective. And when enough shadow content builds up, without being acknowledged, it erupts. This is why you're seeing toxic behavior everywhere. The narcissist, who can't tolerate any criticism because they've never integrated their capacity for imperfection. The virtue signaler who attacks others with self-righteous fury because they've never acknowledged their own moral failings. The online mob that destroys people's lives over minor infractions because the collective shadow needs a target for projection. These aren't separate phenomena. They're all expressions of the same psychological disease, the refusal to face what's been hidden in the unconscious. Jung studied this pattern extensively in his work with patients and in his analysis of history. He noticed that whenever societies suppressed certain aspects of human nature, those aspects didn't vanish. They manifested through their opposite. Victorian sexual repression led to underground perversions and hypocrisy. Totalitarian idealism led to unprecedented cruelty in the name of utopia. Modern cancel culture's obsession with moral purity leads to mob behavior more vicious than any of the sins it claims to punish. This is the paradox of the shadow. The more you deny it exists, the more powerfully it controls you. The more you proclaim your righteousness, the more certainly you will act out the very evils you condemn in others. The toxicity you're witnessing operates through a specific mechanism Jung identified as shadow projection. When someone has completely repressed their own darkness, they cannot see it in themselves. But the psyche demands that this content be recognized somewhere. so the unconscious mind projects it onto others. This is why toxic people are so certain about your motivations, your character flaws, your hidden agendas. They're not seeing you. They're seeing their own shadow reflected in you. Time 0.6. And because they have no conscious relationship to their shadow, they experience their projections as absolute truth. This creates the phenomenon you've probably experienced. Someone attributes thoughts, feelings, and intentions to you that exist nowhere in your consciousness. You try to explain that they've misunderstood you. They become more convinced that you're manipulative, defensive, gaslighting them. Your attempts to correct their distorted perception become proof of their accuracy. This isn't a communication problem. This is unconscious shadow projection, creating an alternate reality that feels completely real to the projector. Jung documented this pattern extensively in his clinical practice. He worked with patients who destroyed relationships, careers, and entire social networks through relentless shadow projection, all while maintaining complete innocence about their role in the destruction. These individuals genuinely believed they were victims of malicious people who targeted them unfairly. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. They could describe in elaborate detail the cruelty, manipulation, and betrayal they experienced. But when Jung investigated, he discovered that what they described as attacks were often neutral interactions, distorted through their projections. A colleague's constructive feedback became evidence of jealous sabotage. A friend's honest concern became proof of judgmental contempt. A family member's boundary became an act of cruel abandonment. The projector's unconscious mind was rewriting reality to avoid confronting the shadow contents they could not accept in themselves. The danger escalates because shadow projectors recruit others into their distorted reality. Jung called this collective possession. When someone presents their projections with absolute conviction, others experience psychological pressure to align with that certainty rather than trust their own contradictory observations. This is how families scapegoat innocent members, how workplaces mob employees based on projected accusations, how communities destroy individuals for qualities that exist primarily in the accuser's unconscious minds. You've probably witnessed this pattern. Someone begins spreading concerns about another person, always from a place of apparent care or worry. Gradually, others start seeing the target through the projector's lens. The victim finds themselves defending against accusations that seem to come from nowhere, isolated by a collective delusion they never participated in creating. This is the psychic epidemic Jung warned about. Entire groups organized around shared projections, attacking external enemies to avoid confronting the darkness within. The persona problem runs deeper than simple dishonesty. When people identify completely with their social masks, they don't just lose authenticity. They lose the capacity to process reality. The persona is designed to manage external perceptions, to present yourself in ways that gain approval and avoid rejection. But when the persona becomes your entire identity, you can no longer distinguish between what you actually are and what you're performing. This creates what Jung called the perfect person problem. Someone so adapted to social expectations that they've lost all connection to their authentic self and shadow. You can recognize these individuals by their uncanny social perfection. They always know the right thing to say, the appropriate emotion to display, the correct political position to adopt. But something feels hollow in their presence. Their eyes are empty. Their responses feel scripted. They're performing humanity rather than embodying it. What makes persona-identified individuals dangerous is that their repressed shadow accumulates under enormous pressure. Think of it like a psychological pressure cooker. All the rage, the selfishness, The inappropriate desires they cannot acknowledge get sealed in the unconscious with no release valve. The longer this continues, the more explosive the eventual eruption. Jung documented cases of seemingly perfect individuals experiencing sudden shadow eruptions, destructive episodes where years of repressed content emerge all at once. The model employee who embezzles millions, the devoted parent who abandons their family, the moral crusader exposed for the very behaviors they condemned. These aren't hypocrites who consciously live double lives. These are people whose shadows took revenge for being denied too long. The mass mind operates through a terrifying mechanism. When people stop thinking as individuals and start thinking as a herd, morality disappears. Not because the group consciously chooses evil, but because the group has no conscience. Conscience requires individual reflection, the ability to examine your own motivations and actions against internal standards. But the mass mind has no interior. It only has momentum. This is why mob behavior is rising across every domain of society. Online mobs attack people with righteous fury, never questioning whether their target deserves destruction. Political mobs demonize opponents with absolute certainty, never considering their own capacity for the same flaws. Consumer mobs cancel brands and celebrities based on minimal evidence, never examining why they feel such intense satisfaction in collective punishment. The mass mind doesn't think, it reacts, and its reactions are always extreme because it has no individual conscience to moderate its impulses. Jung feared the mass mind more than any other psychological phenomenon. He watched it consume Germany in the 1930s, transforming a cultured society into a nightmare of collective possession. He saw ordinary people commit atrocities they would never consider as individuals because the mass mind gave them permission. He recognized that when people dissolve their individual identities into group consciousness, they don't become more moral through collective wisdom. They become amoral through collective unconsciousness. This is why toxic behavior spreads like a virus. One person's shadow projection infects the group. The group amplifies and validates the projection. More people join the collective certainty. The original projector gains power through numbers. The target becomes increasingly isolated. Eventually, the mass mind feels completely justified in whatever punishment it inflicts because so many people can't be wrong. Except they can. And throughout history, they repeatedly have been. The terrifying realization is this: if you do not separate yourself from the mass mind, you will be consumed by it. The toxicity isn't just around you. It's a wave moving through society, and you are standing in its path. Every day you spend unconsciously absorbing collective narratives, group opinions, and shared hatreds. You move closer to possession. Every time you find yourself certain about someone's character without examining your own projections, you are being infected. Every moment you spend in online spaces designed to trigger outrage and tribal thinking, you are losing your individual soul to the collective shadow. This isn't a metaphor. Jung documented how this process works psychologically. Your brain's pattern recognition systems start aligning with group consensus. Your emotional responses begin mirroring collective affect. Your thoughts increasingly reflect received opinions rather than individual reflection. You stop asking whether something is true and start asking whether your tribe believes it. This is how the infection spreads, one surrendered individual consciousness at a time. The only cure is what Jung called individuation. This is not a simple process. It requires you to become conscious of your unconscious, to face your shadow instead of projecting it, to distinguish between your authentic self and your persona, to resist the pull of collective possession and maintain individual perspective. Most people will not do this. It's too difficult. It's too lonely. It requires you to be willing to be an outsider, to walk alone, to trust your individual perception even when the mass mind insists you're wrong. But Jung discovered something crucial. To be sane in an insane society is a revolutionary act. When collective consciousness is possessed by unconscious contents, individual consciousness becomes the only refuge of truth. This doesn't make you superior, it makes you responsible. Responsible for maintaining awareness in a world increasingly dominated by unconscious reaction. Individuation begins with shadow integration. You must identify what you've repressed about yourself, your capacity for cruelty, for selfishness, for the very qualities you despise in others. This doesn't mean acting out these qualities. It means acknowledging that you contain them. When you can admit that you are capable of every human failing you observe in toxic people, you stop projecting your shadow onto them. You start seeing clearly. This person isn't evil incarnate. They're a human being acting out unconscious contents they cannot acknowledge. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it prevents you from becoming possessed by the same unconscious hatred you condemn in them. Shadow integration creates psychological immunity. You can witness toxicity without absorbing it. You can recognize projection without being wounded by it. You can maintain compassion without being destroyed by those who exploit it. The second phase requires persona differentiation. You must learn to distinguish between the masks you wear and your authentic self. Ask yourself difficult questions. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I actually believe versus what I perform believing? Which of my convictions come from individual reflection versus tribal belonging? This process is disturbing because most people discover they have almost no authentic self beneath their personas. Everything they think, feel, and believe has been absorbed from their environment, programmed by their culture, adopted from their chosen groups. But this awareness is the beginning of freedom. Once you recognize that you've been performing an identity rather than developing one, you can start the work of discovering who you actually are beneath all the masks. This individual self won't be comfortable. It won't fit neatly into existing categories. It won't make you popular with any tribe. But it will be real. And reality is the only foundation for genuine individuation. Jung taught his patients specific practices for persona differentiation. Spend time in complete solitude daily, without any external input or performance. No social media, no consumption of content, no interaction with others, just you and your own mind. In this space, notice what arises naturally versus what you've been trained to think and feel. Notice the difference between your authentic reactions and your conditioned responses. Notice when you're thinking for yourself versus rehearsing thoughts you've absorbed from your chosen authorities. This practice reveals how much of what you consider your personality is actually borrowed, adopted, performed, rather than genuinely yours. The goal isn't to eliminate all social influence. That's impossible and undesirable. The goal is to develop conscious awareness of what belongs to you and what belongs to your conditioning, so you can choose consciously rather than react unconsciously. The final phase involves conscious separation from collective possession. This is the most difficult step because it requires you to resist the gravitational pull of the mass mind while remaining engaged with society. You cannot simply withdraw into isolation. That's spiritual bypassing, using individuation as an excuse to avoid the challenge of conscious participation. True individuation means you maintain your individual perspective while engaging with collective life. You can participate in groups without being possessed by group consciousness. You can hold political positions without demonizing everyone who disagrees. You can recognize social problems without losing yourself in mob solutions. This requires constant vigilance. The mass mind is always pulling at you, offering the comfort of certainty, the security of tribal belonging, the pleasure of righteous hatred directed at acceptable targets. Every day, You must choose individual consciousness over collective unconsciousness. Every interaction requires you to check whether you're thinking for yourself or thinking what your tribe expects. Your sensitivity to the rising toxicity isn't a weakness. It's evidence of your psychological differentiation. People who are deeply embedded in the mass mind don't notice the psychic epidemic. They're carriers of the infection, spreading unconscious shadow projection without awareness. But you notice, you feel the wrongness of it. You recognize that something has fundamentally shifted in how people relate to each other. This sensitivity means you still have access to your individual consciousness. The infection hasn't taken you yet, but you are not immune simply by noticing. You must actively work to maintain your individuation. Every day that you don't consciously integrate your shadow, you move closer to projecting it. Every moment you spend consuming collective narratives without individual reflection, you surrender more of your consciousness to the mass mind. The psychic epidemic will either destroy you through unconscious possession, or it will force you to individuate fully. There is no middle path. You cannot remain partially conscious in a world of collective unconsciousness. Jung's final warning about the mass mind was this: when individual consciousness disappears into collective possession, the worst aspects of human nature emerge without moral constraint. History proves this repeatedly. The witch trials, the Inquisition, the totalitarian nightmares of the 20th century. These weren't aberrations. They were what happens when the mass mind gains complete control. And we are moving in that direction again. The mechanisms are different. We have social media instead of public squares. We have cancel culture instead of show trials. We have algorithmic amplification of outrage instead of state propaganda. But the psychology is identical. Individual consciousness is being dissolved into collective possession. The shadow is being projected onto designated enemies. The mass mind is demanding sacrifices to maintain its illusion of righteousness. And most people are participating unconsciously, convinced they're fighting evil while acting out the very darkness they claim to oppose. You have a choice. You can surrender to the mass mind and join the psychic epidemic, spreading unconscious shadow projection while believing yourself righteous. Or you can do the difficult work of individuation, facing your shadow, differentiating your persona from your authentic self, and maintaining individual consciousness regardless of collective pressure. The second path is lonely. You will be misunderstood by those still possessed by collective unconsciousness. You will be accused of being judgmental, negative, problematic, or worse. The mass mind attacks those who refuse to be possessed by it, because your individual consciousness threatens the collective illusion. But this is the price of consciousness: to see clearly when others are blind, to think individually when others are absorbed in collective thought, to maintain your soul when the mass mind demands you surrender it. Jung called people who successfully navigate this path the conscious minority. Not superior to others, but genuinely awake. Not perfect, but deeply aware of their imperfections in ways that prevent unconscious possession. Not immune to darkness, but consciously related to it. The world doesn't need more people spreading toxicity through unconscious shadow projection. It needs more individuated souls who can maintain consciousness in the midst of collective madness. Your sensitivity to the psychic epidemic is your invitation to become one of these rare individuals. The rising toxicity isn't just something happening to you. It's something directly challenging you to evolve beyond collective unconsciousness. Everything you're witnessing, every single toxic interaction, every manifestation of the mass mind is showing you what happens when humanity abandons individual consciousness for collective possession. And it's asking you a question: will you join the infection, or will you develop immunity through individuation? This is Jung's final warning about why society is filling up with toxic people. It's not about individual bad actors. It's about the collective loss of individual souls to the unconscious mass mind. And it will continue until enough people choose the difficult path of individuation over the easy comfort of collective possession. The psychic epidemic will spread until individual consciousness becomes strong enough to resist it. That resistance begins with you, facing your shadow instead of projecting it, distinguishing your authentic self from your persona, and refusing to surrender your individual soul to the mass mind, no matter how much pressure you face. You are not crazy. You are not too sensitive. You are awake in a world that is choosing to sleep. And your wakefulness is precisely what humanity needs to survive the psychic epidemic Jung predicted. Stay conscious, stay individual, stay human. The mass mind wants your soul. Don't give it away. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.